So let me walk you through the basics. These are three basic vascular waveforms in radiology. The first two are very important for us. So when we're talking about a peripheral artery, you can imagine the probe on, say, femoral artery, or in our case, very important to know. The example is uteroplacental flow, which means uterine artery basically. All right. Similarly, when we talk about a visceral artery, it's the artery to the kidney, to the heart. In our case, fetoplacental flow, which means umbilical artery. It even includes ductus venosus. All right. Okay. So what you see here is a triphasic waveform. Triphasic why? 1, 2, 3. This is the systolic peak. This is the early diastolic backflow, and this is again the late diastolic forward flow. All right. So if I have to take out the mean for these, maybe somewhere here would be the mean forward flow in this particular vessel. This is normal. Coming to the visceral artery, what you see here, this is the systolic flow. This here is the diastolic flow. All right. What you see is that the diastole never goes beneath the baseline, which is why this is a monophasic flow with pulsations. Pulsations. Like a sawtooth. Just to cover this topic, let me also tell you about the venous flow. It's very simple. It's just like this. Inspiration, because high flow is during inspiration, that's why it's upgoing, and this is downsloping. In DVT, because there's not going to be any flow through the vessel, that's why it's a straight line. Okay, now our main topic. This is the uterine artery. This is the umbilical artery. During the first trimester, the placenta is just forming. The uteroplacental flow is just beginning to develop, which is why it's a high resistance circuit. That is why the triphasic flow that we just studied is being followed here. Alright, the mean forward flow through the uterine artery would be somewhat here. Coming to the second trimester, when our uteroplacental flow is well developed, and because we need to increase the circulation, increase the blood flow to the uterine artery, the resistance in the placental circuit also decreases. What you notice here is not a triphasic waveform. You could call it biphasic maybe. And nowhere is the diastole going beneath the baseline. Alright. The mean blood flow would be somewhere here. Third trimester, resistance decreases even further. You see what was going like this has now become somewhat like this. The systolic peak is merging with the diastolic flow. So it's a forward systolic flow, it's a forward diastolic flow. And therefore the mean flow is going to be the highest of all the three. Which makes sense also because it's the third trimester. We cannot compromise with the uteroplacental circulation anymore. So you notice a good diastolic flow and you do not notice any early diastolic notch. Moving on to the umbilical artery. This is a visceral artery, है ना? So this is our forward systolic flow. This is our forward diastolic flow. This was somewhere in the second trimester. In the late second trimester and the third trimester, you notice an increase in diastolic flow. तो अगर यहाँ पे ये था mean flow अपना, अब ये ऊपर चला गया है. Again, it makes sense because this is the umbilical artery is what is supplying the fetus finally. Two terminologies, these are important from the MCQ point of view, are the SD ratio and pulsatility index. SD ratio is nothing, it's systole by diastole. So if the diastole is going up, the SD ratio is going to decrease. This is normal, alright? Please remember, this is normally happening. Pulsatility index is systole minus diastole upon mean. Please remember, whenever resistance decreases, the pulsatility index also decreases. You can calculate it for yourself. The most important part, when there is impedance in either of these flows, uteroplacental or fetoplacental. This is what was happening normally, and look at it now. Poor diastolic flow. This is our systole, this is our diastole, and you also notice a diastolic notch. Basically, from the third trimester waveform, it's as if we're going back, as if from a low resistance circuit we're going to a high resistance circuit, which is what basically the waveform is about, increase impedance. And that this means insufficiency. Alright, that's not good for us, that's not good for the fetus. If it happens, if this form is before 22 weeks, you might as well leave it. You keep the patient on follow-up. But if it is above 22 weeks, actually some books say 20 to 24 weeks, then it is indicated of preeclampsia. You must immediately inform your obstetrician. This was in the uterine artery. Back to the umbilical artery. What happens in fetoplacental flow is compromised. Three things can happen, alright. One is the diastolic flow decreasing, reduced end diastolic flow. What do you do here? You keep the patient on follow-up. Second scenario, absent end diastolic flow. What do? You intervene. Intervention matlab less than 34 weeks हैं तो steroids दो, more than 34 weeks हैं तो you immediately deliver. Third, worst prognosis, intrauterine death expected within 24 hours is the case of reversed end diastolic flow. Alright, what do? You terminate. Irrespective of POG, you terminate. Alright. Okay. You can do the math. The SD ratio and pulsatility index are going to decrease in these flows. Alright, so I wanted to mention here, and maybe you could guess while I'm explaining to you which artery this is. So this is an artery in which fetal anemia is also measured. That should be a good clue. In this artery, this is again a visceral artery of the fetus, that's why the sine wave form. However, what happens in fetoplacental insufficiency? This is what is expected, right? Instead, the flow is increasing. The diastolic flow is also going up, multiple notches. That's because the fetus, it's actually the MCA artery. Let me just tell you before. And this is known as the brain sparing effect. The blood supply to the brain is trying to be maintained using this waveform.